the microphone to my face, so just signal if I'm too loud or not loud enough. So I'm from Bleacher Report. I co-founded Bleacher Report 11 years ago, and I still run it. Quick, our history: we're a sports media brand. We're kind of like the challenger brand to ESPN in the United States, and we're pretty big globally as well. If you're under 30, there's a pretty good chance you use us a lot. If you're over 30, you might be more of an ESPN person. That's kind of how the demos tend to break out these days. So Bleacher Report, just real quick, we've been around for 11 years. We grew up as a web publishing business. A lot of Google traffic, a lot of Facebook traffic, newsletters. I heard the previous speaker talk about diversified sources of traffic. That is exactly what we did over the years. Same strategy, and we built a big business off the back of that. We hit a point where that business, and just in general, for those of you who actually, one question: how many people here have businesses who are either ad supported? Like anyone here in the room who has ad supported businesses? All right, few hands. How many people rely on social media to help drive your business? All right, more people. That makes sense. So I'm going to basically go through a case study around what Bleacher Report has done to evolve our business as this landscape, really like the whole media landscape, the social landscape is changing. The advertising world is changing. I'll run you guys through it, and then we can dig into any questions that might be helpful. So we're pretty big on social media. That's one thing we can talk about. So I think for context, when we were starting our business, we were a content company. So when I say content company, a lot of people in New York, very very media-centric ecosystem these days, know what a content company is. In the Bay Area and Silicon Valley in general, investors and people here just a little less familiar with content companies typically, but we are a content company. And when we were looking to get off the ground in the 2005 to 2008 era, basically every investor hated content companies. There were no good examples of really any content companies that had made money, that had exited, that had been anything but a sinkhole in a number of years. So we had a really hard time raising. We had a hard time just in general convincing people that what we were doing was valuable. And so I would just say that it was a challenging period to get a media company off the ground. I think the era that we went through from maybe 2010 to 2014 was pretty different. I think media got really hot. Facebook started pushing publisher content. A lot of companies got into the space at the right time. It was really easy, relatively compared to when we started, to drive traffic and then to be able to monetize traffic. I think the landscape has gotten a lot more challenging over the last, call it 2 years, and especially over the last year, where getting a content company off the ground, or let's just say getting any ad-supported business off the ground right now is hard, right? There are a lot of ways for advertisers to reach audiences these days. Again, for the people who are in the ad business, it used to make sense for advertisers to buy basically spots and dots around websites that had attractive audiences like ours did. Today, it's easy to just buy targeted audiences on Facebook or Twitter, or even to now that Snapchat is launching similar products. So we got to the point essentially where we had 36 million or so, something. Maybe we did a little better than that at the time, but say 35 to 40 million unique visitors in the United States on a monthly basis. Really attractive demo, highly concentrated in 18 to 34 young males. Advertisers were very eager again to buy spots and dots, which in a lot of cases were display banner ads or pre-roll with us. and it was a good business. And the business, I'm not allowed to talk about exactly what our revenue numbers are, but I'll just say it was a 9-figure business, and it went well. So about a year and a half ago, we realized, though, that the display media business specifically, like all of those media agencies and big brand marketers that we were counting on to help us, double the size of our business over the next few years, were not going to look to us in a traditional sense to increase their budgets with us by 50 or 100%. It just wasn't going to happen. They were going to move more of their budgets over to, say, Facebook. And a lot of us are in a very interesting situation where the platforms, which I'll talk about more, are kind of like our friends, and they're our enemies, and people call them frenemies. But it's a very interesting dynamic. But for us, we realized that just in general, the traditional owned and operated business, it really wasn't like a website and an app. Just being in the website and app business and selling ads around it, like it's not a growth business anymore. Like it's a maintenance business. And you're probably lucky if you can grow it by 5 or 10% a year. It's just my view is it's just not the future. So keep blowing through this. So what we did is we said we really don't have a choice other than to really embrace social media. Like the audience is all moving to social media. We have to do everything we possibly can to become the social voice, in our case, of sports and sports culture. The bet is that we can figure out how to monetize our audience on those platforms, even though monetization opportunities at the time when we're making this decision are super, super unclear. The rules are changing all the time. There aren't clear branded content standards. Facebook isn't sharing revenue in any sort of meaningful way around video. It's just challenging, but it's a leap of faith that we just have to have basically an internal religion and value system that says if there's audience here, we need to be there, and we need to be the brand that an audience is connecting with and ultimately trusts, and perhaps we even come to influence them over time. So we got really, really serious about social media and basically transforming our entire content staff. So Bleacher Report is about a 500-person operation. We have almost 250 people in New York. We have all kinds of crazy designers and video people and animators and just a lot of really talented people. And we started to think about how we created optimized content for each platform and how we marketed content on each platform versus basically just creating one set of content that could live on web and in our app and kind of went everywhere. Like that strategy clearly was not going to get the job done. So we had great results on Facebook. We have grown tremendously on Facebook. I would say a lot of publishers and content companies have grown tremendously on Facebook. Not a unique story. I think we do especially well. We did even better on Instagram. We've done extraordinarily well on Instagram. I would say audience engagement on the Instagram platform is stronger, at least as far as we see it, than any other platform. And it's amazing. I'll just give an example that if you go to the Bleacher Report account on Instagram, which is our second largest account, our largest is an account called House of Highlights. But if you go to Bleacher Report, every single day that we put a link in our bio on Bleacher Report, so say we have a story we're especially proud of, and we create a post that says, check out this link in the bio to our post, we get over 100,000 referral clicks from our bio back to the article. So it's just amazing how engaged our audience is on this platform. And then we also, a lot of, whether you're in the publishing business or in other businesses, I would say, Twitter's had a hard time growing their audience for the past few years. Publishers traditionally have not gotten a lot of referral traffic or engagement out of Twitter. We really have cracked Twitter. I think our voice on Twitter is just right. People retweet our content a lot on Twitter, and even though we already had a great deal of strength there, we managed to grow tremendously. So the strategy here, in essence, and my theory about the future of this space, to be honest, is so there are a lot of people who create content right now. Like there are a ton of people who create content. I think if you had a beer with certain people inside the platforms, be they Facebook or Snapchat or whoever, I'm guessing there are certain people inside of them that would say there are too many people creating content and a lot of them are going to go out of business or a lot of them are going to be smaller, and that's kind of okay. I'm not going to place judgment on whether or not it's okay, but I do agree with them that based on the way advertising dollars are flowing and based on the fact that it's hard to build a subscription business where you get to scale. It just is. Some people manage to do it, and God bless them if they can do it. It's a really, really hard thing to do, but it's possible. But a lot of these businesses are ad supported, and it's just tough. They're going to get squeezed. My view is the way you combat that and the way you make yourself valuable going forward is you have to advertisers, is that you truly have to become an influencer brand. If you, whatever you're doing, I think are not, and you're ad supported, if you are not influencing your audience, like if you're not actually able to shape their behaviors, whether the audience is big like ours is, we reach over 250 million people a month, or it's niche and it's in a niche category, I don't think it matters. But I think, to me, the core principle going forward is you have to actually be able to influence an audience. The days of creating content that kind of drives passerby usage, that's a little bit BS-y, and your metrics are going up, and for many of us when we were getting started, if you could just run more display ads or get more page views or whatever and drive more revenue, it's just not going to work anymore. It's already starting to work less. All signs are pointing to it working less. But if you have influence, true influence, there's great potential. Sorry. So what we can now do because of, and it's amazing what happens sometimes when we post things on Instagram or we post, or something goes up on Snapchat or whatever. It's like we actually are shaping behaviors. We're influencing athletes themselves. It's real deal stuff. Now what we're experiencing is that advertisers, marketers are coming to us and want to be a part of that. But the important point is because they are able to buy audience anywhere. It's like okay, we can buy audience with you. We can buy it on Facebook. We can buy it anywhere. What they can't do is they can't start authentic conversations around their products or their brand. And I think that's the really important point. And to me, that's the big opportunity. It's like they really can't in any way themselves authentically start that conversation and get people to talk about what they need them to talk about. And I think if you are able to come up with solutions in the marketplace that actually solve problems, because they actually do have to solve problems for marketers, again, if you're in this space, then I think you have a very, very viable business. But I think that's the way you have to look at the world now. It's like you've got to be able to influence an audience, and you have to be able to come up with solutions for advertisers. So what we're doing, big picture business-wise, is we're starting to win some really big campaigns where we've got the biggest advertisers in the sports space coming to us and saying, hey, we used to look at you as just an audience to buy against. Now we're starting to look at you as a strategy. We have a TV budget that's classically has been a $50 million or $100 million TV budget, and we're still going to spend a bunch of money on TV because it's a great reach vehicle. But what we're realizing is that a lot of, especially men in the under 34, let's say 18 to 34 demo, who used to watch TV or used to pay attention to commercials, just aren't doing that anymore. What they are doing is they are sharing your content with their friends at an extremely high rate, and when they are actually most engaged and most impressionable around sport seems to be when they're with you guys on these platforms versus like if we're being honest with ourselves, the kid might not be willing to sit through the white noise of watching the entire game just to see the 3 plays that he or she wants to see. When the commercials come on, like everybody's going to be on their phone anyway and not paying attention to the commercials. So if you can reach the audience through the influencer brand on social media when they are actually most engaged and most impressionable, that's solving a really big problem for advertisers who just find it to be harder and harder to get young people to pay attention to their messages. So it's just a very, very interesting time in our space. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this, some of you aren't. Like NFL ratings this year are down significantly, and everybody's kind of trying to figure out why it is. My view is we'll see what happens, but I think the NFL is just kind of, it's lost some of its cool factor. It's maybe has been so popular for so long that it had to start coming down at some point. Or maybe to some extent, young people just aren't going to sit through the experience that many of us sat through when we were growing up, because the experience has too many commercials and it has too much downtime and it doesn't move fast enough, and the world is just changing. So we are creating content for what we think the world is going to look like on the other end. It's content that is optimized for people to share with their friends. It's optimized for advertisers to be a part of in a way that doesn't disrupt the content experience, but also offers meaningful exposure for the advertisers. A lot of it is shaped around culture and the culture of sports, which frankly people are more interested in these days. More people are interested in than just knowing what the score was. We're actually watching the game. That's not necessarily the most compelling part of the content. And then we're experimenting a lot with all kinds of different formats. So we've become a bigger and bigger player in animation, for example, which is really cool. We're doing a lot of creative work around video. We're doing more episodic shows. We're basically trying to build as much trust with an audience as we possibly can, so they start to view us more and more as maybe more of a channel on social media, the way you might have had, for those of us that are old enough, you might have had a great deal of loyalty to MTV at a certain point in your life. We want people to feel like they have the same sort of trust and experience with us through social, where they start to view us again as more of a channel versus just somebody who posts a ton of one-off content. So with that, there's some more slides in here, but I think that's the gist. So if there are any questions about anything related to the media ecosystem or sports or advertising or platforms, would be happy to share my perspective.
Awesome. So thank you very much. So first question is very relevant. As a frequent Bleacher Report consumer of content, how does the death of Vine affect you guys? I know Vine is a very useful tool for sports highlights.
The death of Vine. Yeah, we were huge on Vine. The good news is we did not make a penny off of Vine, so it doesn't hurt our business in any way. I mean, without regaling with all the mistakes that I think were made around Vine, I think it's a little bit too bad that Twitter didn't sell Vine to somebody else and kind of figure out a way to keep it going. But I think one of the reasons we became so big on Vine, frankly, is because everybody else kind of moved off it, and so we were kind of like, a little bit of the only game in town, and had a premonition that something like this was possible. So it sucks, but it's not the end of the world.
How did you decide to take on a behemoth like ESPN, and what kind of scrappy stuff did you guys do in the early days to take them on?
So I was a second semester senior in college when I decided to do Bleacher Report. Didn't know it was going to be called Bleacher Report, but it was like a mid-year crisis, and I was like, I don't want to work in finance. I want to go do something real with my life. And so I was a big sports fan and I had a couple of observations. I was just consuming so much online sports content because I had so much free time on my hands at that point. And I had a couple observations. One was that the content that was created on average were by old sports journalists who seemed to be creating content for their peers versus for their audience. On average, they seemed so out of touch with how my generation talked about sports and thought about sports. Like the content it wasn't fun, it wasn't entertaining, it was very wordy. It worked for some people, but it's like Grantland, if you're familiar with Grantland. Grantland worked really well for some people, but a small number of people. It didn't work for the average guy in the upper deck at an NFL game. It just didn't. So that was one observation. Sports was not entertaining enough. The other was I was an economics major in college, and there seemed to be a ton of supply and demand inefficiencies in sports, specifically around teams, players, topics. Where I'll give a basic example where the Major League Baseball All-Star Game was a really, really big deal in this country in the 1960s and the 1970s and the 1980s, and for people running newspapers or other media outlets, it was a big deal. So everybody would send somebody to the Major League Baseball All-Star Game, and they would cover the crap out of it. Well, over the years, interest waned, and it got to the point where by the time it was 2007, not nearly as many people gave a damn about the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. So the audience wasn't that big. Amount of coverage, like surplus of coverage, not that much audience. On the flip side, there were all of these transactional events in sports where the exact opposite phenomenon was the case. Like the NFL draft, for example, was the first big one we really cracked. So Google used to have a product called Google Insights. And Google Insights was, now it's not around because of all kinds of privacy issues, which is fair. But it was so great because you could search for any term on Earth. And you could see exactly how many people, like in Insights, you could punch in NFL draft, and you could see how many people searched for NFL draft in any single, at least day of a 365-day year. So what we would do is we would create content, and then we would push it out. And in the early days, our early days, Google News had just launched, and so we would get traffic from Google News, and we'd look it up in Google Analytics, and we'd say, there are all these people at this time of year that are searching for the term NFL draft order on the last day of the NFL regular season. And we thought, there are like 1 million people who just searched for this on the last day of the NFL regular season. Why is this happening? And it was happening because the Oakland Raiders fans finally knew what their end of year record was. So say they went 3-13 that year, and they're like the 49ers of today, yeah. And so they'd want to look forward to next year and see who they had a chance to draft, because they knew on that day that they'd be drafting third, or they'd be drafting first or fourth. And so they'd start to say, okay, can we get a new quarterback, or can we get a pass rushing specialist? And they were holding on to hope, and they wanted to see who was next. So for them, draft coverage really started on that date. But traditional sources of sports media weren't starting their draft coverage in earnest until March. So we started our draft coverage for every single team and at a national level on the last day of the NFL regular season. So we basically just, from a data standpoint, we ended up mapping out the entire sports calendar in the United States by sport, by team, by player. We got to the point where we knew everything about why people were searching for something. If there was an event that, like a one-off event that happened, all horrible things happen in sports all the time. But if something like that happened, we could learn from it and see what worked well and identify patterns. And then the next time something similar happened, we would just do it again better. So that's kind of what we did, and we were able to scale a big audience off the back of that strategy.
Awesome. I actually used to write for you guys around the time of
Nice.
the Turner acquisition, and I just thought it was very interesting. Maybe you could talk a little bit about this balancing where you really went from a contributor-based content strategy to then you're hiring these really, Howard Beck and all these writers. How did you balance that kind of not conflict, but you're based on these unknown writers writing most of your content, and all of a sudden you have these well-known sports writers and the two
Yeah.
mixing together?
So for background, so we started a media company with no money, which is a terrible idea. Media companies are super expensive. People who can create good content are really expensive. So we had no idea what the hell we were doing. It's like, let's start a media company, and realized very quickly from having conversations with VCs or whoever that they said, you guys will never ever be able to build an audience that will be big enough to sell advertising. You've got ESPN, you've got CBS, you've got Sports Illustrated, you've got NBC, you've got, like, the list goes on. Sports is it's a very crowded space. So we said, okay, if we're gonna do this, we need to get really scrappy, and we need to figure out a model that is going to scale at our price point. So essentially, we started by we attempted to build a meritocracy for sports content creation, and the idea was that you wouldn't have to sit behind the old guy at the newspaper to wait for him to die to get the beat, to get the beat you wanted. You could start writing about it for us today, and we would help you reach a much larger audience than you ever could on your own. So we basically built a large supply of writers, a lot of whom were bloggers or college newspaper writers, or whatever other aspiring writers, and then we connected those writers with data, and they started to basically outmuscle a lot of traditional players in the space because they were actually writing about topics that sports fans cared about, which it turned out that was pretty important. So I would say vision-wise, though, our mission and our goal was always to create the best possible experience for young sports fans. And so we always knew that we were going to, when we could, start bringing more expensive people onto the platform. So we sold the company to Turner Broadcasting, which is part of Time Warner, which might become part of AT&T. But we sold the company in 2012. In 2010, we started paying some of our writers. By the time we got to 2012, we were paying, based on tiers and whether people were kind of doing their own thing or whether they were taking, all kinds of stuff. And we were kind of, I would say, halfway through that transition. By 2014, we finished it where we're kind of a professional editorial and video staff now. Everybody who creates content for us is a pro. And that's what we migrated to. We did it very thoughtfully, and a lot of people from the early days have, some of them make a lot of money now and have done very well. A lot of people didn't make it too, and that's kind of how the meritocracy thing worked. It was a hell of a lot of work to do. I would not advise anybody to get into the UGC content game around text. If you want to do it around video, that's probably a much better idea. Text is really hard. But.
Okay, and last question: Do you guys build your own content creation tools in-house, or?
So it's a combo job these days. So we have a 60-person product and engineering team in San Francisco that basically runs and maintains our own platform. So web publishing, CMS, we have very complex programming tools that support we have a really popular app, and they support the app, and then they support the content we obviously push to all the different platforms. I would say more and more our technology organization is morphing towards a kind of a content creation tools organization. It's going to take us years to get there, but my view is, I'll just give an example. Like I'm enamored with how Trey Parker and Matt Stone do South Park. Like I'm sure some of you have seen the documentary around making a South Park episode in a week. It's crazy and super cool. But they basically started out by doing traditional stop motion animation where they would have cardboard cutouts, and then there would be Cartman's nose, and if you wanted to shoot a frame, you would move Cartman's nose in the cardboard, and then on you went over and over again, and that would take a long time. But what they realized is, hey, what if we basically put this into software where it's still technically stop motion animation, where you now drag Cartman's nose on a little animated screen, and then you take a shot of it and go on and on. But they could start doing it a lot faster. The point is they were able to accelerate the rate of their ability to do the animation down to like being able to do it in a few days, where they could create a new episode a week, which meant that they could hit on current events, which meant that they basically had a barrier to entry over any competitor because they were able to create something that nobody else could create for a really long time. So my mindset is very similar, where I'm trying to leverage whether they're tools we build ourselves or they're effects that we build. Where I'm kind of we've done a lot. I think we've done a lot of innovative things over the years. But what happens over and over again is our competitive set will just watch what we're doing, and then they'll just copy us. Over and over again, this happens. What I'm very much trying to do is to create barriers to entry through somewhat talent, but mostly technology, where and through a lot of tools, where it's going to be much, much harder for them to replicate our success and replicate the reasons why users are engaging with our content or advertisers are spending money with us.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you.